Manny Skevofilax, welcome to the conversation today.
John, thank you for having me.
It is a real pleasure to be with you. You're joining us from Baltimore. I'm south of Salt Lake City in Utah. And today we're going to be talking about leveraging empathy to help businesses thrive. In this day and age of complexity, where things are just rapidly changing and shifting, the ground is shifting below us. I think this idea of empathy is just ever present and just so much. There's so much importance behind it, more so perhaps than ever before. It's not a new concept. It's not something that we haven't thought about before. But I think in particular during the pandemic, it really came to the forefront. It came to be really emphasized in conversations around leadership and around management and around how we were going to respond to the pandemic because people were being challenged. Leaders were being challenged. Our people were being challenged in ways that we weren't perhaps used to, and in new, interesting ways. And even post-pandemic, now we're in a new kind of post-pandemic world, but we're still facing disruption. We're still facing challenges. There's social and economic and political disruptions. There's technological disruptions, and we still find ourselves in a world of constant change and a constant shift and constant upheaval. And in that kind of an environment, we need empathy and we need leaders who are willing to embody that and to exude that. So this is what we're going to explore, what we're going to discuss in our conversation today. As we get started, I wanted to share Manny's bio with everybody. Manny Skevofilax, a seasoned consultant and captivating speaker, possesses the extraordinary ability to breathe life into businesses, ensuring they thrive on all fronts. With over 2 decades of dedicated service in his field, Manny has been the guiding light for countless business owners seeking to cultivate a robust and flourishing enterprise through his business portal, CFO. His clients have even described him as not just an ordinary consultant, but as a business therapist. Since 2003, Manny has been on a relentless mission to elevate business to their highest potential. I could keep going. There's so many really cool
Uh,
things about what you've done, what you've accomplished, your background, but I'm going to pause there. Is there anything you would like to highlight by way of your background or personal context before we dive on in?
sure. My parents were born in Greece on this beautiful picture behind me on an island in the South Aegean named Karpathos. They immigrated to the United States after World War II and grew up in the restaurant business together with them. And that's where I got my early foundations and kept my radar up in terms of how employees were treated. And I worked for about 9 years in corporate banking. And then for the last 21 years, I work as a business advisor, John, helping business owners maximize profits and overcome growth challenges.
Yeah, that's amazing. And it's a beautiful picture for anyone watching the video. Of course, you can see it for anyone just listening to the audio. You can't, but it's gorgeous, beautiful,
Mhm.
scenic beach, sun, blue sky in the background, just gorgeous. It's always wonderful to just uh, to look at, to see your roots in a place of your upbringing, your parents' upbringing in this case. Wonderful, wonderful to see, where your parents, first generation Greek immigrants, where they came from, and where you've come in your career and in your life, helping business owners and helping them to thrive. As we get started, perhaps share with us some of those pivotal moments that led you to develop your own unique approach to helping businesses thrive. In your consulting role, you refer to yourself as a business therapist, or perhaps others to refer to you that way. Um, yeah, what has really guided you or helped to develop you
Mhm.
into this kind of an approach, or how you work with organizations?
Yeah, sure. So one of my clients actually coined the term business therapist, which we got a good laugh out of, but
Yeah.
that's how he felt about it. You know, this is a long period of time, John, of reflection and experience where I grew up in a very strict and regimented environment as a result of my parents immigrating from a foreign country. And, um, you know, I don't want to say that empathy was lacking, but let's just say it wasn't the number one thing on the list. So let's just call it, it was like a general with all the other troops marching in lockstep behind them. So that started kind of, um, I started thinking about that over time, that it really wasn't a happy type of work environment where you were just told to pretty much take orders, and there
Yeah.
wasn't really a whole lot of concern in terms of how you were doing and some of the things that motivated you or drove you. So that's kind of the inception of where it all started.
Yeah. And nobody likes to be in that environment.
Mhm.
Um, Frankly, I'm not sure some leaders probably do, but I think most leaders don't like to lead that way. It's just kind of
Mhm.
the default. They don't know any different. They've observed others lead that way. And so they just kind of perpetuate it, it's kind of uncomfortable. I think it's uncomfortable for
Mhm.
everyone. And everyone knows it's not liked. So I don't think people like it. I don't think people like to lead that way. People don't like to be led that way. Yet we tend to fall into it, and even some people fall into asking to be led that way, even though they don't like to be led that way, just because
Right.
it's I don't know, it's there's a certain comfort level with just being told what to do,
Right.
instead of having to like figure out what you're gonna do and being empowered to like drive your own direction. So it's interesting. It truly is interesting, this kind of micromanaging, autocratic, directive, style versus a more empowering, empathetic,
Mhm.
approach to leadership. And we're in a different world today than we were in previous generations and styles of leadership. We're in a different economy.
Yeah.
It's one thing maybe you can get away with it in more of an industrial economy with factory workers, even though I will still argue that it's still probably not the best even in that setting, but perhaps you can get away with it more in that kind of a setting. But in a knowledge economy where you need people collaborating across silos and you need creativity and innovation and
Mhm.
it just doesn't work that well.
Yes. And, kind of the next step for me was I started observing um, and recognizing that, why is it that certain businesses have employees that are just absolutely happy to be there and
Yeah.
they speak very highly of their leadership? And why are there other businesses that their employees kind of trudge into work every day and, gosh, this is just a job? And that really piqued my curiosity. So I kept paying attention as, I went through the family business phase, then I worked for others. I work with many different clients in the bank, and I kept seeing the same thing over and over again. And it was, we have to have structure first and foremost. I found it's very difficult to get to your outcomes without structure, but it doesn't necessarily mean you need to be, kind of having that general attitude. And I
Right.
found, John, that the employees that were the happiest were the ones that had an empathetic leader that
Mm.
showed that they truly cared about their employees' well-being and growth.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. And even with structure, that is the difference maker, showing that you care about their well-being, showing that you
Mhm.
care about their growth in a genuine way, right? That you want them to develop, you want them to grow into their capacities and their capabilities,
Mhm.
and that you're going to support them in that you're going to help them in that development, not just you know, say those words, but you're actually going to show it, that you're actually going to create the mechanisms and the structures to help them to accomplish it. That goes a really long way. And people know the difference. People know if you're actually truly trying to support them in that. And they know the difference between a leader who is helping to develop them versus a leader who may say those words, but has zero interest in actually providing that kind of support.
Yes, and I noticed that. So for me, it was a difficult transition, right? Because I was used to the autocratic methods of management, and I started reading books as I was continuing my education and working, and I was reading about this concept about empathetic management, and then I started seeing these examples where Um, a company decided to increase its growth and their star players would leave. And I'm
Mm.
leaving like, boy, that's a terrible development to have put all this time, effort, and capital into developing your team members and then they turn around and leave. That caused me to want to understand why that was happening. And I found again that because I work with all different types of companies, John, that are going through rapid growth. So it creates stress in the organization. And the organizations that are more empathetic with their employees are the ones that are able to better and more efficiently handle, rapid growth strategies.
Yeah, well, and the irony here, because I hear from leaders, they're like, well, if I invest in my people, if I help them develop their skills, if I help them develop, and prepare for that next step in their career, if I do that, they're just going to leave. They're just going to go, and then all of that investment is down the tubes for us, and they're just going to go to my competitor, and now, we're screwed. I hear that argument all the time. And I think, well, okay, maybe like some will, absolutely. But here's the thing. If you don't invest in your people, they all will leave. So it's
Great
like
point, John.
it's like that catch 22. So yes, some people will leave, absolutely. It's just the name of the game. And particularly in high growth areas, particularly in tech companies, that's just how it is. And I don't think there's any way around it. And in tech firms, it's kind of the expectation that you're going to be moving around at least every couple of years. And if you
Right.
don't, it's almost like it's seen as something's wrong with you. And so, that's just part of the game. But yeah, if you're not investing in your people, you're not going to attract good people. And
Right.
if you don't work on developing your people, you're certainly going to be losing all of your good people anyways. And so you're definitely better off having a plan in place to work towards developing your people. It will help you retain some of your good people. Yes, you will still lose some of your good people, absolutely, but you would have lost them anyways. And you will be able to retain some of them because of your investment in them, and that will pay dividends for your company. So, anyways, I get it. I get it's hard. I get it's frustrating to invest in someone and then to see them go. But you have to think of it from both sides.
Yeah, very well said. One other
Yep.
thing that popped up on me was, and this is earlier in my business advisor career, I would go in and now, of course, I've drank the Kool-Aid myself, and I understand why it's important to be empathetic and to be patient. And I would just ask the business owners, hey, what are you doing along the lines of taking care of your employees? And they would kind of get a little surprised. They're like, you're here to kind of look at the economics and efficiencies of my business. Why are you asking me about the treatment of my employees? And I would tell them because you're making this massive investment in here, and it doesn't
Yeah.
matter how great the economics are, if you don't have the quote unquote, people that want to be here to execute, you're not going to get to your outcomes. And it was a real eye opener for them.
And it's kind of mind-boggling to me. It's like a duh moment. Like like of course, like what do you think? Of
Mhm,
course you need, good human capital. You need good people in order to help you drive and implement and bring value to the market. Of course you need to be able to do that, but sometimes people really do need to be reminded of that fact because they get so caught up in all of the other facets of the business. And I get it. There are all these other areas that you absolutely have to focus on, but it is the people that are going to actually do the creating, that are actually going to do the producing, that are actually going to interface with the customers, that are actually going to bring the value to the market. So you cannot ignore that. And you have to have good people. You can have the most amazing product. If you don't have good people to do that interface, it's going to get lost, right? You have to market it, you got to sell it, you got to bring it to the market, otherwise it's going to get lost. So, absolutely, absolutely. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about some of the essential components that are needed for businesses to thrive, particularly in this rapidly changing business environment. Things are shifting around us constantly. I mean, it's hard for us to plan we used to talk about 5-year strategic plans. I mean,
Mhm.
those are so obsolete because, I mean, I can't even imagine trying to think about what things will look like 5 years from now.
Mhm.
Trying to think about what things will look like a year from now is so hard because things are shifting so fast. So, like, what are you seeing as those most essential components as things are rapidly shifting around us?
I would say after making sure that your communication is clear with your
Mm,
employees, because I found that
mhm.
there's a mismanagement of expectations
Sure.
between the
Yeah.
leadership and what that employee is thinking. So I highly recommend that you give your employees three outcomes that you want from them every month, so they know exactly what you're expecting of them. And then I recommend to the business owner to um, keep their eye on their financial results and stop every month, at least for an hour, because that's another one of those things, as you mentioned, there's so many hats that they're wearing at the executive level that certain things fall by the wayside. And one of them is a boring financial review.
Hmm. Hmm. So those financial pieces, absolutely. Other
Yeah.
essential components.
I would say to keep try to create reasonable goals for yourself in terms of the growth. What may be reasonable for John is might not be reasonable for Manny. Different types of people, different types of businesses. We have to remain cognizant that the faster that you want to grow, it's going to create more and more stress on your organization, and you have to make sure that your organization is able to handle it.
Yeah, and on the growth point, I don't know if you're familiar with it, and I can't remember. I apologize, I can't remember the author off the top of my head. Really brilliant author. A book that came out several years back called Donut Economics. Um,
I don't know.
brilliant analysis, and essentially it's challenging this notion that I think is super common, especially in the Western world. This notion that we constantly have to be growing, and it certainly is common, right? We always talk in Western culture. We always talk about in business, if you're not growing, you're dying, right? That's the phrase. Um, and in business, there's some truth to that, right? And certainly in
Mhm.
perception, there's truth to that. But it's worth challenging sometimes that assumption or challenging that notion. And in this book, that's essentially what she's getting at is endless perpetual growth for the sake of nothing else but just growth um, actually can cause harm, and it really can. You can grow your company in unsustainable ways where you just become a house of cards, right? And
Mhm.
and businesses do this all the time. Economies, like countries, do
Mhm.
this with their economies all the time. And you build a house of cards where you don't have the structures in place, and you become way too vulnerable. You over leverage your debt. All these different things that we could dig into and talk about. So growth is good. Growth is great, but you got to do it in a smart way, and you don't want to do it in an unsustainable way. And sometimes dial it back. Like it's okay
Yeah.
to dial it back, and sometimes it's okay to just maintain where you're at in order to be sustainable and in order to
Mhm.
be healthy with where you're at, right? So, anyways, that's the point I'm making in relation to what you just said. That let's be thoughtful rather than
Mhm.
just constantly trying to plow forward. We see sometimes companies, sometimes CEOs getting into trouble with unethical behaviors as well, just because they're constantly trying to push forward with this ongoing drive for growth when they're not really capable of doing it in a sustainable way.
You make excellent points, John, and I came to the same conclusion over a long period of time. I felt like I kept watching the same movie over and over again, the growth movie, let's call it, where these companies were growing, but they weren't really making any more profit. And that ended up with some really poor consequences and outcomes. You were creating a bunch of stress on your organization, your employees are leaving. What did you really accomplish when you grew your business, from, let's just throw numbers around, from 5 million to 10 million? Are you making more money? What is the beneficial outcome from it? And I feel that the pendulum is kind of shifting in that people are more cognizant, back to your points about, you know what, I don't need to put all this stress on my organization if there's not going to be any benefit afterwards, right? Because you have to be able to take care of yourself, right? Your family, your employees, make your charitable donations to your community, and that's all going to occur through profit.
Yeah, yeah. So as we start to wrap up, let's finish by just talking about some of those most significant challenges and opportunities for businesses in the near future. Like, what do you see coming down the pipeline, next 6 months, next year, next couple of years, amidst all of the rapid changing environment that's happening around us? Put on your little prognostication hat here
Yeah.
for a minute. Like, what do you see coming down the
Uh,
pipeline?
Difficult question, but I'll do my best.
We don't have a
What I like
crystal
to,
ball, but
yeah,
yeah, you know,
this is what I tell my clients. I tell them that I got to get my crystal ball out, and what do I see when I look at it? I just see my face looking back at me, you
right,
know.
right.
But what I see is a continuation of costs continuing to go up, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Due to the economic environment that we're in. We're seeing costs across the board, which, back to your point, is going to necessitate some level of growth on the top line because your expenses, your payroll expenses are going up, your overhead expenses, the cost of energy, et cetera. So I think we're in for more of that. That means you need to be very, very careful in terms of, is your product still providing the same value to your clients? Did you go and ask them what they like, the most about working with you, so you don't have to waste time? Um, some difficulty perhaps in liquidity in the
Mm,
banking environment, which,
hmm.
the higher rates is certainly going to put some headwinds on businesses wanting to borrow money for expansion. And then the continued shortage that they're telling us about with respect to quote unquote qualified employees. So I think it's a time, it happens. When I was a banker, they told us that it was a pendulum. They likened it to a pendulum, that the economy at one point, the pendulum would be on the way on the left, and banks would be lending, and everybody would be growing and happy. And then at some point, the pendulum would shift to the other side, and the opposite would occur. So
Yeah,
some
I mean it.
great care.
Yeah, and it does. It swings back and forth, and like you said, I want to zoom in just for a moment on the labor market piece. And we've totally seen the pendulum swing back and forth on the labor market piece just over the last few years, right? In terms of labor supply demand issues, we've been talking about quiet quitting, and we've been talking about the ebb and flow of kind of the power of employers versus employees, in that supply demand dynamic has definitely shifted dramatically over the last few years. But one thing that I don't think has changed, and one thing that's going to continue to be more challenging for organizations, is the fact that we still have a skills gap in the labor force generally, and particularly for in a variety of STEM fields, in healthcare, in certain fields. We just have a huge skills gap, and we have a shortage of workers in engineering, in certain types of different industries and types of jobs. And it doesn't look like there's really an end in sight for that. Of course, we're really good at increasing our productivity. We have tools, we have AI, we have advanced robotics, we have like these disruptive technologies that are helping us become more and more productive with less and less labor. That's going to help us fill that gap to an extent, but it's going to be an ongoing challenge. And I'm not sure how we're going to completely respond to that. So we have to continue to upskill and reskill our workforce, and it's going to be something organizations are going to continually be grappling with. Well, Manny, I know at the time I need to let you go and get on with your busy day, but before we wrap up, I just wanted to give you a chance to share with the audience how they can connect with you, find out more about your work, and then give us a final word on the topic for today.
Sure. My website is the best place, Portal, Portal, CFO.com, has a lot of interesting information. I also wrote a book, John, that was published by Taylor and Francis, Ultimate Profit Management, Maximizing Profitability as You Grow Your Business, which I feel very blessed that I've been able to take the blueprint that I learned from my teachers and mentors to give a set of tools and a guide to business owners to be able to focus on profitability as we discussed as they grow. And I think
Awesome.
it's just a time for just great care and minding the store and taking care of the team with empathy.
Well said. Thank you so much. I encourage the audience to reach out, to get connected, find out more about what Manny can do for you. Check out the book. And as always, I hope everyone can stay healthy and safe, that you can find meaning and purpose at work each and every day. And I hope you all have a great week.